Welcome to Inside NLCS Singapore, where we have conversations with the people that shape our community. And today I'm joined by Ty Holden, our Head of English. Thanks for joining us, Ty.
Thank you for having me.
And look, Ty, one of the things that's really, really important to the NLCS ethos is this importance of subject passion, subject specialism. And I don't want to embarrass you, but whenever we talk about that, you're used as the example.
Why, thank you.
by our students, by our parents, by your colleagues. So I really want to sort of dig into your passion for your subject and just find out why that's important. So why don't we start with your passion for literature? Where did it come from? Was there a moment in time where a penny clicked and this fire was lit? Just talk to us about your experience.
Great question. I haven't actually been asked that question in a professional setting, but I think it's an interesting one for me personally because I always read as a child, but I was the sort of child that liked all different kinds of books. So literature, for example, growing up in Oxford, I definitely really enjoyed Philip Pullman's books because that connection to that context. But I would also read a lot of your low literature, if you can even fit it within that definition. Like Jacqueline Wilson was something that I read a lot of as a child. But I always read, and I read often to my mother's dismay, like Into the Night, Under the Covers, With a Torch. Like I was always reading. But yeah, reading such a variety of books, and I didn't actually really encounter some of those more kind of traditional classical works of literature until I was a bit older. And I think what kind of led me to read so much was, on the one hand, for a kind of escapism, but also I was looking for a sense of belonging. I had quite a difficult childhood, so I grew up in a single parent background, so I think books provided me with that sense of belonging that I sometimes felt that I didn't have because of that kind of childhood, and they transported me. I was, like I said, I read such a variety of more of that kind of realist fiction, but also fantasy and gothic fiction, and I think books for me really transported me, and I think I've kept that. And as an adult, I love magical realism as a result of, I think, that early childhood reading, because I do think books are a great transporter. And when I'm thinking about this, a quote that comes to me, because obviously I'm a really avid reader of words, is Emily Dickinson's quote about books, that there's no frigate like a book to take you to lands away, which I've butchered. That's not the exact quote, but yeah, I think books really transport you, and that's what I needed as a child, and that is what started that fire, that passion. And then obviously I went on to university. So I studied English at A-level. I had an amazing English teacher. She was educated at Oxford University, but it was certainly very, very different to what you'd expect an Oxford graduate to be like. She would come into lessons dressed in tracksuit bottoms and, had her coffee in her hand and would go off the curricula and talk candidly about what literature meant to her, and I think that continued that passion. I also had an amazing teacher called Mr. Spice at school who would rap to us on occasion. He would do all of the accents for all of the books that he was reading to us aloud. And so, even though I went to a state school, I did have some amazing English teachers that continued that passion for me. And then I went on to study it at university. I went to Sussex University, which again expanded my horizons even more, because it's the kind of university that would give us diverse voices on our curriculum. It would honour tradition, so we had to specialise in certain kind of centuries of literature. So I read anything from Shakespeare to lyric poetry, but also diverse voices as well. So that kind of helped to expand my horizon too. But yeah, it did start in childhood for me. And it's something that is still a huge passion of mine today, and that I'm so lucky that I work in an educational setting where I can bring that passion into my profession and hopefully instill it in my students. And like you say, it's kind of working a little bit. And
so many of us have got that experience, haven't we, of My interpretation is reading the right book at the right time, and where you are and what you're going through in your life at the moment, something just resonates and it becomes quite a transformational experience.
Absolutely.
I'm assuming you've experienced that. Just give us one example where you've read something and it's almost been life-changing.
I'll give two examples because they happened quite close in conjunction with one another. I read Jane Eyre as a late teenager. I think I was about 16 or maybe 17 years old. And that book really stayed with me because there are certain chapters that are written when Jane Eyre she's she is living in a household as essentially a foster child. And there's a chapter on her essentially being assigned to the Red Room, and the kind of claustrophobia that Bronte is able to create through her words made me feel that experience. And as a result, I felt true empathy for that character. And as a teacher, I'm a huge believer that literature is an amazing vehicle to build empathy in our young people, precisely because of that ability to identify with characters in certain moments in a text. And then later in the novel, you learn that the love interest, Mr. Rochester, is actually already married, and Jane Eyre is kind of weighing up her options there. And I was telling her to leave the situation. I think some readers would have told her to stay, but that was a moment again where I felt genuine empathy for the character. And then later, a couple of years later, I read Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, and it's actually the prequel to that novel. So it's written from Mr. Rochester's wife, Bertha Mason, who in the original is entrapped in the attic. She is this Gothic-like figure, this mad woman that exists in this liminal space, and she sets the house alight. Spoiler alert, sorry if you haven't read the text. But hearing her voice in Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys was so interesting because it gave me a totally new perspective. But again, it helped me to build empathy for that kind of character that had essentially been sidelined in the original, but then was given a voice and was the protagonist in this new text. So I think those two texts, reading them in quite close conjunction to one another, was really transformational for me, because I think as a teenager, when you're going through changes and, as a young woman as well, and thinking about what lied ahead in terms of university and trying to find your place in the world, understanding that from two totally different perspectives, a 19th century author trying to navigate the Victorian context versus a Caribbean woman. Jean Rhys herself grew up in the Caribbean, but also had ties to Wales, and also existed in this kind of identity that wasn't quite reflected as a woman who knew the struggles of those in the Caribbean where she grew up, and but also had that tie to the United Kingdom. I think both of those authors' experiences are reflected in their own novels, and I think that was transformational for me, because I learned not only about this idea of empathy, but also language being able to transport you, so that you really felt like that character was feeling at that time in those moments when those authors are crafting that with their language, but also how an author can totally change your perspective on a character. So I'd say that was an example.
Okay. Let's explore how that passion translates into the classroom, and in particular how it impacts our students. How do you find our students respond to your passion in the classroom?
I'm often described as the type of teacher that's quite energetic. I don't like to have any passengers in my lesson, so that can be seen often as having really high expectations, sure, but for me it's about engagement. Like, I do not want a student to be sat as a passenger in my lesson. So, for example, when we're reading a novel together, it's about ensuring that everyone is involved and engaged in some way. So I'm a big believer in reading aloud in the classroom. We use drama text a lot in our teaching here because I don't think there's anything better as an English teacher than experiencing a text together, a whole text as well, with you and your students, and going through that text. Not as, we have very high academic expectations, and that comes through in the analysis, but when you're experiencing that text together, kind of, informalizing informalizing it a little bit and saying, do we care about this character here? And if we do, why? Like, what is it that the author is doing that makes us feel something? What is our feeling and our emotions here? And trying to get students to know that they can engage with literature and that there's no right or wrong answer, that their emotional response is a valid response. And obviously then we develop that later with the analytical framework and getting them to evidence their ideas. But in those initial stages of experiencing a text, for me, it's all about ensuring that everyone is engaged and involved, that we're experiencing it together, and that they are noticing how they are feeling as they are reading, and understanding that emotional response is a valid response. And that should stir us emotionally. Like, we are emotional beings, we look for connection. That if we are feeling, sympathy for a character, that's notable, and we should talk about it and discuss it. So that's one thing that I do in my lessons. I'm also a big believer in modelling reading, and I think that that's something that we've tried to, as an English department, in our culture for reading that we've built here, is that we model that we are readers. So that might look like an informal conversation in the corridor, where if I see a student is holding a book that I've personally read, telling them my opinion of it and asking them what they thought of it or what they thought about that character, or, modelling reading during tutor time, talking with my tutees about what I'm currently reading, modelling reading in my lessons and showing them that there are books that I like, there are also books that I don't like as well. And I often say to students who feel a little bit apathetic with reading that you just haven't found the right book yet. It's not that you dislike this practice, you just haven't found something that speaks to you yet. And the great thing about literature is that, there are new works being written and produced all of the time, so that there will always be something out there for everyone. It's just that case of having that curiosity and trying to find it. And that's what I try to instill in my students, that they can find it and they will find it, and that I think that it's something that is it's so important that they continue that reading for pleasure practice that I try to kind of instill in the classroom, but hopefully that is something that they want to continue outside of the classroom, because, as English teachers, we actually know that reading for pleasure is one of the, I think, single biggest indicators of a child's future success. It's a quote that we often use in professional development settings to try to stress that reading is something that needs to be a whole school commitment, because of how important it is on our young people's future success.
Yeah, and our children, our teenagers in particular, they're in a particular world, aren't they? A particular context where they are incredibly busy, and they've got all sorts of social pressures that were probably not evident 10 or 15 years ago.
Absolutely.
And for many of them, it would be quite natural for the only reading they do to be on their social media feeds as they go through their phone in between commitments and appointments and what have you. How concerned should we be as a broader society of that almost out of fashion trend of just picking up a book and reading?
Yeah, I think that's one way of looking at it, but I would also say an alternative perspective is that some social media platforms can generate interest in reading. So if you think about TikTok, for example, and this whole notion of book talk and being able to share recommendations on that platform, that's actually had quite a positive impact on reading, with lots of those recommendations then being curated in bookstores, and you go in, you see that there's this setup, and I think that is a way to pique young people's interest especially. However, I am a huge advocate for reading print. There's actually a lot of research coming out. It's not well researched, but there's some emerging research that shows that actually reading on print versus reading on screen is much more beneficial when it comes to things like comprehension, which is obviously what we're trying to develop in our students. And so I do think that there's nothing can beat picking up a physical book and reading it and having that, experience of that physicality of the book. But it's really hard in a digital age where, attention is so split and attention has become a kind of currency online. So I don't have an answer at this stage. It's something that we talk about a lot within the department. But again, I think it does come back to modelling. And I would say this to parents as well. If you want your young person to value reading, are you showing that it has value in your home? Like, do you read? Do you talk about what you're reading with your children? I mean, we do at school, we ask staff, certainly when we read in tutor time, to also be modelling reading, and there are some amazing staff members that do that. We model it in lessons, but we obviously don't have control over what students are doing in their own time. And I think that trying to show the value of it in that way is hopefully having some impact, because I do think that young people are influenced by, their educators and their family, firstly, more so hopefully than who they are conversing with in the social media space. But yeah, it's a really challenging question. I don't have an easy answer. It's something that I think is going to be crucial for my subject area. I mean, actually, English is in a little bit of a crisis at the moment, in that we're seeing fewer and fewer students uptake it as a course, certainly in the A-level programme in the UK context. So you've got cohorts diminishing, people always asking about the value of an English degree. But I think that it's so important for such a conflicted society to have that reading for pleasure practice, precisely because I feel so passionate about the fact that literature can build empathy, and that's what's needed in our current age. And literature is something that builds imagination, and some of the problems that we need to come up with to solve some of the most complex issues require a level of that. I think literature can build connectivity. So these are all things that are useful for our modern age, but it's a shame that in the digital space that's diminishing. However, I do think that some technologies enable more accessibility to reading. So, for example, audiobooks are a way to engage readers who have learning needs, for example. So there's again been research to suggest that if a child who struggles with reading, if they read alongside an audiobook, that can be really beneficial for their developing their understanding and their comprehension. So I think that some technology can always be useful, but the kind of texts, if we can call it that, students are engaging with online, there's a reduction of quality because of how difficult it is to quality assess what it is that they're encountering.
You're demonstrating your passion for your subject clearly. And we started this conversation with me highlighting that you're a great example of that part of the NLCS ethos, that focus that we put on making sure that we're appointing teachers who are passionate about their subject. Why is it so important? If we zoom out, let's not just think about the English department, but zoom out across the whole school and the whole subject span. Why is that focus on subject passion so important?
I think it's so important in an educational setting because ultimately that's why we're all here. Like, obviously, there are some schools that may promote this idea that you're teacher first, subject specialist second. But I think that the way that you excite young people about what they're learning is that you genuinely have a love of that subject as well. And I think that because of our strong NLCS ethos, where the emphasis is on that, it makes for an amazing environment where I genuinely feel that I've developed so much of my own subject knowledge precisely because of the staff members that we have here who are so knowledgeable, and the sharing of that. So, I've attended McCabe lectures delivered by history teachers and learnt so much about the formation of race as a concept. I've attended McCabe lectures by drama teachers and learned about an alternative perspective to a text that I know really well, like, for example, a lecture on Othello. So I think that it's the kind of culture that's created because of the emphasis on that is so important, because not only are you instilling that love of subject in the students that you teach, but you're creating a culture whereby staff are having conversations about those subject areas and in turn developing their own subject knowledge. And I think that that is really important, because if you think about, I think that that's why we come to being teachers in the first place. It's not probably because we've enjoyed doing our PGCE, it's because we loved something about our subject as we were growing up, and we wanted to continue exploring that passion and share that passion with young people. So to have that as a focus is one of the reasons why I've stayed in the institution for so long. I'm about nearly 7 years in now, and I think that's a genuine aspect of the ethos that I feel that not only I agree with, but I live in my day-to-day.
So let's take that forward, because in August you've got a really exciting new role.
Yes.
You are taking on the role of assistant principal, academic. How do you think that commitment to subject passion and subject specialist teaching will impact your leadership far more widely than just the English department?
Great question. Well, one of the...
It's almost an interview question, isn't it? I apologise.
One of the responsibilities I will have in my role next year is for the academic enrichment programme, which I'm really, really excited about, because not only will that enable me to kind of spread that message more widely beyond the English department, but what I'm most excited about is helping students develop their own academic passions. And I know that that's a project that's been going on this year, but I think that when students take on some leadership and share the aspect of a certain subject that they're passionate about and all its minutiae, they gain so much from that. I mean, yesterday I led a workshop on public speaking skills for some of our students that will be going to compete in an academic competition. But across the corridor, one of my students, who is a language and literature higher level student, was leading an economics seminar on Donald Trump's, something to do with his economic policy that he's implemented. I'm no expert, but I waited at the end of that seminar that he was delivering, and I just asked him, how did you find that? I could see all of these grade 9 and grade 10 students really engaged. He looked super confident, and he was like, I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. And it was so nice to see one of my students who I teach in the English classroom engage students in what they are genuinely passionate about. So I think that's one aspect of the role I'm really looking forward to, is that, cultivating this environment where students feel like they can also share their academic passions and take on seminars and take on some student leadership, but also learning from staff as well what they're passionate about, and continuing that as something that's already been set up and we do so well here, but continuing that culture. So I think that's something that staff really positively feedback on, is that we're an academic institution. We value those academic conversations. We value sitting in the staff room and sharing in our disciplines. Like we challenge each other in that way, and I think that's something that staff find like they really enjoy, that aspect of our school. So I want to continue to create that culture. In terms of my own subject passion and what I'll bring and how I'll bring that into my leadership, is, again, I go back to empathy. I do think that literature helps to build empathy, like I've said before, and I want to be a kind of empathetic leader. I want to be attuned to everything that goes on in our school, both in terms of teaching and student learning, and be empathetic to the needs of our learners, but also the needs of our staff as well. So that's something that I hope that I can bring into my own leadership, but I've not thought about it in much depth yet.
I think you've given an answer in a huge amount of depth, actually.
Well, good.
So thank you for that. Look, to end this conversation, we've stolen an idea from a famous podcast, and we're asking everyone to leave a question for the next guest to answer. The person before you that has left a question for you is Jonathan Guy.
Oh, amazing.
Okay. Now, Mr. Guy has not left a question. He has left a quote from a book that he's reading at the moment, and he's asked if you can reflect on this quote.
Okay.
So it's a book by Catherine Rundell,
Yeah, great author.
and the quote is, "How much of us is what we know and what we live?"
Interesting. How much of us is what we know
And
and what we live,
what we've seen.
what we've seen?
Sorry,
Okay.
let me get that quote right. How much of us is what we know and what we've seen?
Okay. Interesting. Sounds like a TOK question.
Yeah, yeah.
How much of us is what we know and what we have seen? It's a really good question. So I think to know something fully requires more than just an initial understanding. And I think it's quite a pertinent question in our modern world where we're bombarded with things to be seen. If you think about the kind of visual nature of our culture nowadays. I don't have an easy answer to that. I have a reflection.
So that's interesting, because when Mr. Guy left this, my initial response was, well, that's easy. How much of us is what we know and what we've seen? I think everything. We are only a product of what we've seen, what we've experienced, what we know. And Mr. Guy tellingly just said, "Is it?" and walked away, and that was enough to cast doubt in my mind.
Yeah, I think
that
there's
maybe it's
the
far more
distinction
complicated.
between the knowing and the seeing there is
Yeah.
deliberate.
Good point. Yeah, good point. Okay, so maybe we'll take that as a reflective exercise to be thought about and dwelt upon.
Absolutely.
And we'll grab a coffee at some stage and reflect on it with Mr. Guy. So, Ty, thank you for everything that you do for our school, and thank you for the conversation.
Thank you for having me.